Between October 1975 and November 1980, a man attacked 13 women with hammers and screwdrivers in the north of England and killed them. He attacked at least 7 more, who survived. The press called him the Yorkshire Ripper. The police launched the biggest manhunt in British history. 2.5 million man-hours. More than 150 officers at peak. And during that investigation, they interviewed Peter Sutcliffe, the actual killer, the man they were looking for 9 separate times. And 9 times, they let him go. I need you to understand why, because it is not the reason you think. Sutcliffe did not beat the system with brilliance or charm. He beat it with paper. The West Yorkshire Police incident room at Millgarth Station ran on index cards. Every lead, every witness statement, every interview, every tip-off from the public handwritten on a card filed in a cabinet. By the height of the investigation, there were so many cabinets that the floors of the room had to be reinforced to carry the weight. And in that ocean of paper, the information that would have identified Peter Sutcliffe was there. All of it. Written down, filed sitting in a drawer. But no human being could cross-reference it because the system was not built for the volume of information it was asked to hold. Let me give you specific examples because vague claims of system failure do not do justice to how close they were and how simply the connections could have been made. In 1977, police found a 5-pound note in the pocket of a murdered woman named Jean Jordan. They traced it to the payroll of one of 6 companies. One of those companies was Clark Transport, where Peter Sutcliffe worked as a lorry driver. He was interviewed. He gave an alibi. His wife and his mother both confirmed it. The alibi was accepted. The card was filed. Police discontinued the search for the recipient of the note. Sutcliffe went home and within weeks killed again. On another occasion, officers sat across a table from Sutcliffe and showed him a photograph of a boot print left at a crime scene. It was a distinctive print, a specific make, a specific model, a specific size. They were hoping someone might recognize it. Sutcliffe was wearing the same boots, the exact same make, the exact same model, the exact same size during the interview. Nobody looked down. I need you to hold the absurdity and the tragedy of that at the same time, because they are not separate things. A man wearing the murder weapon on his feet sat across from the people looking for that weapon, and the people looking for it were looking at his face. On yet another occasion, his friend Trevor Birdsall sent an anonymous letter to the police naming Sutcliffe as a suspect. Birdsall had been the unwitting getaway driver in Sutcliffe's very first documented assault back in 1969. He had carried suspicion for years. He finally put it in writing and sent it. The letter was filed. No follow-up was recorded. When Birdsall later came in person to name Sutcliffe directly, that was filed too. By then, the investigation was chasing a different lead. I want to pause here and do something that doesn't come naturally in this kind of story, which is to be fair to the people working in that room. These were not lazy officers. The Ripper investigation was under enormous pressure. Public fear, press hysteria, political scrutiny from Downing Street. The officers were processing thousands of documents a day with no computers, no searchable databases, no way to flag a name that appeared in one drawer against a name that appeared in another. The system was paper and paper has no memory. When Sutcliffe himself later said at trial, "It was just a miracle they did not apprehend me earlier." They had all the facts he was not boasting. He was describing accurately the distance between having information and being able to use it. But here is where fairness has a limit, and I need to mark it clearly. The system was paper, and the system was also bias. The Byford Report. The government review conducted after Sutcliffe's conviction found something beyond the filing problem. It found that officers had treated the case differently based on who the victims were. Several of the early victims were sex workers, and the prevailing attitude within the investigation was that the Ripper was killing prostitutes, and that this, in some unspoken way, made the case less urgent than it would have been otherwise. When Sutcliffe attacked women who were not sex workers, some investigators resisted reclassifying those cases as Ripper attacks because it didn't fit the profile they'd built. One surviving victim, Marcella Claxton, was discounted as a Ripper victim because she was not a prostitute, even though she produced a photo fit of her attacker that later proved to be an accurate likeness of Sutcliffe. Her record existed. It was dismissed because she was the wrong kind of victim. The paper drowned the record. But the bias decided which records mattered. And the women who died in the years between Sutcliffe's first interview and his last were killed by both. And then came the hoax, and this is the part of the story that turns from frustrating to unbearable. In 1978 and 1979, a man the press would call Wareside Jack sent 2 letters and an audio tape to the police claiming to be the Ripper. The voice on the tape had a Sunderland accent, a Northeast accent, hundreds of miles from where Sutcliffe lived in Bradford. George Oldfield, the assistant chief constable leading the investigation, became convinced the tape was genuine. He had a reasoned analysis of saliva on the envelopes, showed the same blood type as samples found at Ripper crime scenes, a type shared by only 6% of the population. It was a coincidence, but Oldfield took it as confirmation, and he staked the investigation's direction on it. Suspects who did not have Northeast accents were deprioritized. Television appeals asked the public to listen for the accent. Sutcliffe had a Bradford accent. He was moved down the list. Other officers warned Oldfield it was a hoax. Linguistics experts raised doubts. But Oldfield had committed publicly, and turning back would have meant admitting the investigation had burned months of resources chasing a ghost. The hoaxer John Humble was not identified until 2005 through DNA on the envelopes and was sentenced to 8 years for perverting the course of justice. By then, it had been 25 years since the last murder. Sutcliffe was not caught by the investigation. He was caught by accident. On January 2, 1981, 2 Sheffield police officers pulled over a car with false number plates. Inside was Peter Sutcliffe and a 24-year-old sex worker named Olivia Reavers. While being processed, Sutcliffe asked to relieve himself and was allowed to step behind some bushes where he dropped a knife, a hammer, and a rope. Sergeant Bob Ring returned the next day on a hunch and found them behind an oil storage tank. In custody, Sutcliffe confessed within 2 days. He told the detective across the table, "It's all right. I know what you're leading up to. The Yorkshire Ripper. It's me. I killed all those women." Then he asked for his wife to be brought in so he could tell her personally. He was convicted of 13 murders and 7 attempted murders and sentenced to 20 concurrent life terms. He died in prison in November 2020. After his death, West Yorkshire Police issued an apology not for the investigation's failures, but for the language, tone, and terminology used during it. The apology came after a victim's son wrote on behalf of several families. It had taken 40 years. The families had asked for something simpler than an apology. They had asked for the records to be read. It would be natural at this point to file that away as a technology problem. Paper failed. Computers fixed it. Lesson learned. The Byford report led directly to the development of HOMES, the Home Office Large Major Inquiry System, which centralized police data across Britain and made cross-referencing possible. System upgraded. Problem solved. Except the next case is not about a record that was buried. It is about a record that was found read and then deliberately destroyed. Not by accident, not by overwork, by policy. In August 2002, a school caretaker named Ian Huntley murdered two 10-year-old girls, Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, in the small English town of Soham. I have told this story before in an earlier episode of this series from a different angle, and I am not going to repeat the details of the crime. If you want to know how Huntley inserted himself into the search, how he gave television interviews while the girls' bodies lay undiscovered, go back and listen. What I need you here for is something else. Something that happened before the murders. Something in a filing cabinet in a police station in Humberside that should have prevented Ian Huntley from ever setting foot in a school. Between 1995 and 1999, Ian Huntley was reported to Humberside Police on multiple occasions for sexual offenses involving underage girls. The number of complaints varied depending on the source. The Bouchard Inquiry, which investigated the case afterward, confirmed at least 8 occasions where Huntley came to the attention of police for allegations, including rape, underage sex, and indecent assault. Some of these led to brief investigations. None led to a conviction. And in one case that came close, a rape allegation, the Crown Prosecution Service declined to prosecute because they judged the evidence insufficient. Insufficient, not false. Nobody said the accuser was lying. They said the case wasn't strong enough to win. That distinction matters, and I need you to keep it in your hands. And here is the policy that killed Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, not the man, the policy. Under the rules, as they existed at the time, Humberside Police routinely deleted intelligence records relating to allegations that did not result in a conviction. No conviction meant no record. No record meant, as far as the system was concerned, no history. The logic was tidiness, keep the files clean, don't burden the database with unproven claims, protect the privacy of people who were never found guilty. On paper, the logic is defensible. I will not pretend it isn't. The right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty is not a technicality, it is the foundation of every legal system worth the name. But I need you to see what that logic does when it meets a man like Ian Huntley. 8 contacts with police. 8. Including a rape allegation that was declined for prosecution, but never disproven. If you line those 8 contacts up on a desk, even without a single conviction, the pattern they form is unmistakable. 1 allegation is a question mark. 2 is a coincidence. 8 is a signature. But nobody ever lined them up because by the time the 5th complaint was filed, the first had already been shredded. In 2001, Huntley applied for a job as caretaker at Soham Village College. He used the name Ian Nixon on parts of the application, though his real name also appeared on the form. A background check was run by Cambridgeshire Police, not Humberside, where the complaints had been filed. The check came back clean. It came back clean for two reasons, and both of them are failures. First, the records that would have flagged him had been deleted by Humberside. Second, Cambridgeshire ran the check against only one of the names on the application and did not cross-reference. The principal of the school later admitted he had not checked Huntley's references. A man with a documented pattern of predatory behavior toward children was handed the keys to a school, and every gate that should have stopped him had been left open, not by force, but by policy and by habit. I want to be careful here because fairness demands it even when fairness is painful. The policy was not invented to protect predators. It was invented to protect innocent people from being haunted by false accusations. If you have ever been accused of something you did not do, you understand the logic. Viscerally, you would want that accusation removed from your name. The problem is that the policy could not distinguish between a genuinely innocent person and a guilty person who had simply never been caught. It treated the absence of a conviction as the presence of innocence. An absence of proof is not proof of absence. Huntley got the job. His girlfriend, Maxine Carr, got a job as a teaching assistant at the primary school, where Holly and Jessica were students. The two girls knew Carr. They liked her, trusted her. And one evening in August, two girls walked past the house of a man whose name should have triggered alarms across the county, and no alarm sounded because the system had been wiped clean. The Bichard Inquiry, published in 2004, was devastating. Sir Michael Bichard found that the failures were not limited to Humberside police forces across England, and Wales were operating with fragmented, inconsistent vetting systems that could not talk to each other. A man could accumulate a trail of complaints in one jurisdiction, move 30 miles to another, and appear spotless. Information that should have been shared between forces was siloed. Intelligence that should have been retained was routinely purged. The inquiry made 31 recommendations. The most significant led to the creation of the Disclosure and Barring Service, a centralized system designed to ensure that intelligence, not just convictions, could be flagged in background checks for people working with children and vulnerable adults. I'll be plain about what that means. It means that after 2004, the kind of record that was erased in Huntley's case would be retained. It means the system was fixed. And it means two 10-year-old girls had to die before anyone decided to fix it. That is not hindsight. The question of whether unproven allegations should be retained in vetting databases had been raised before Soham by child protection advocates, by police officers themselves. It had been discussed and deferred. Discussed and deferred. It took two coffins the size of suitcases to end the discussion. And that sentence, two girls had to die before anyone fixed it, is the one I need you to carry into the next case. Because in Soham, the record was erased before it could be read. In the next case, the record was not buried, not erased, not lost in a filing cabinet. It was active. It was current. It was sitting in a computer that any officer with a badge could have accessed in 30 seconds. And nobody checked. Johnson here. Quick pause. Subscribe bell, all of it. Leave me a case in the comments. Now, in West Yorkshire, the record drowned in paper. Nobody could find it. In Humberside, the record was found and fed to a shredder. Nobody was allowed to keep it. Each of those is a system failure fixable retrospectively obvious and devastating. But both of them let you hold onto one comforting idea, that if the record had been there, someone would have looked. The last case takes that comfort away. I need to tell you about two brothers. Their names were Somsack and Konarak Sinthasamphone, and they were the sons of Laotian immigrants who fled their country in 1979 after the communist government threatened to take the family's farm. The family spent a year in a Thai refugee camp before a Catholic archdiocese helped them settle in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 8 children, 2 parents, 1 roof, a new country. They were building a life. And into the middle of that life walked Jeffrey Dahmer. In 1988, Dahmer approached Somsack Sinthasamphone, who was 13 years old, and offered him money to pose for photographs. Somsack went to Dahmer's apartment. There, Dahmer drugged him and sexually assaulted him. Somsack survived. He escaped. His family reported the crime to the police. Dahmer was arrested, charged with second-degree sexual assault and enticement of a minor, and convicted. The judge sentenced Dahmer to 8 years in prison. Then Dahmer wrote a letter, polite, remorseful, articulate, and the judge reduced the sentence to 1 year in a work release program, followed by 5 years of probation. Dahmer served 10 months. He was released in early 1990 and placed on supervised probation. His conviction was on the record. It was active. It was current. He was a registered sex offender on probation for assaulting a 13-year-old boy. Hold every piece of that. The name, the family, the conviction, the probation. I need all of it in your hands for what comes next. On the evening of May 26, 1991, less than 2 years after his release, Dahmer met Konarak Sinthasamphone at a mall in Milwaukee. Konarak was 14 years old. Dahmer did not know that Konarak was the younger brother of the boy he had been convicted of assaulting. He offered Konarak money for photographs. Konarak, whose family was struggling financially, agreed. He went to Dahmer's apartment. In the early hours of May 27th, Dahmer left the apartment to buy beer. While he was gone, Konarak, drugged, naked, and bleeding, somehow made it out of the apartment and onto the street. 3 women from the neighborhood found him. Sandra Smith, Nicole. Childress and Childress's Aunt Glenda Cleveland saw a boy who was clearly in distress and called 911. When officers John Balserzak and Joseph Gabrish arrived, the women told them the boy needed help. He was a child. He was hurt. Something was wrong. And then Jeffrey Dahmer arrived. Calm, polite, articulate, the same voice that had written the remorseful letter to the judge. He told the officers that Konarak was his 19-year-old boyfriend, that the young man had simply had too much to drink, that this was a domestic matter between 2 adults. The officers looked at Konarak, a 14-year-old Laotian boy who could not communicate because of the drugs in his system, and looked at Dahmer, a composed white English-speaking adult, and chose to believe Dahmer. The 3 women protested. Sandra Smith recognized the boy from the neighborhood. She told the officers he was a child, not an adult. They were told, and I need to be precise here because the language matters, to shut the hell up. The officers walked Konarak back to Dahmer's apartment. They went inside. They saw photographs of Konarak that Dahmer had taken earlier. The photographs apparently satisfied them that the two were in a relationship. They smelled something they would later describe as unusual. In the next room behind a closed door lay the body of Tony Hughes, whom Dahmer had murdered 3 days earlier. They did not open that door. They did not run Dahmer's name. I need to stop on that second sentence because it is the entire point of this episode. They did not run his name. A routine check, the kind that takes 30 seconds on a patrol car computer, the kind that is standard procedure when responding to a domestic disturbance, would have shown that Jeffrey Dahmer was on active probation for sexually assaulting a minor, not a distant minor, not an unrelated case. The older brother of the boy standing in front of them. Same last name, same family, same predator. The record was not buried in 1,000,000 index cards. It was not shredded by a policy. It was live, active, current one query away. And nobody typed the query. The officers left. They logged the incident as a domestic squabble between homosexuals. 10 minutes later, Glenda Cleveland called the station back, concerned. She was connected with Balcerzak. He dismissed her. He did not take the names of the 3 women as witnesses. Within an hour of the officers leaving, Jeffrey Dahmer strangled Konarak Sinthasomphone. Konarak was 14 years old. I am going to say what needs to be said about race and about bias, and I am going to say it plainly. 3 black women told 2 white officers that a child was in danger. The officers chose to believe the white man over the black women. They categorized the situation not as a child abuse case, but as a gay domestic dispute. And in 1991, Milwaukee, in that precinct, that categorization carried with it an implicit instruction, not our problem. An audio recording of the officers' radio communication afterward captured them making homophobic remarks and joking about having reunited the lovers. The officers were fired after Dahmer's arrest in July 1991. They appealed. A judge reinstated them with full back pay, $55,000 each. Balcerzak later served as president of the Milwaukee Police Association, the police union from 2005 to 2009. He retired from the force in 2017. I need to let that timeline speak for itself. The officer who returned a bleeding child to a serial killer went on to lead the union that represented every police officer in Milwaukee. If the system had a way of saying we do not consider this a serious failure, it could not have said it more clearly. The Sinthasomphone family sued the city of Milwaukee. The case went through the courts for years. The family argued that the officers had violated Konarak's constitutional right to equal protection, that they had treated the situation differently because of race, sex, and perceived sexual orientation. A federal judge agreed that the case should go to trial, writing in his decision something that I need to quote precisely because no paraphrase can carry it. The allegations were not just of police inaction, but of police action, which delivered Sinthasomphone, who was a minor not to his parents, but into Dahmer's custody, not inaction, action. The officers did not fail to help Konarak. They actively returned him to his killer. I'll say that once. 4 more people died between the night the officers returned Konarak to Dahmer and the night Dahmer was finally caught in July 1991 when a man named Tracy Edwards escaped from his apartment with a handcuff on one wrist and flagged down a patrol car. The officers who responded to Edwards did run Dahmer's name. They did open the doors. They found what was behind them. And the distance between those two responses, the officers who didn't check and the officers who did, is the distance between 4 more lives and 4 more graves. Here is what a clean record means in this case. It does not mean the record was clean. It means the people who could have read it chose not to. The record was there. It was accurate. It was complete. It contained the name, the crime, the probation. And if anyone had cared to look the family name, that would have connected the boy in the street to the boy in the file. But the officers did not check because they had already decided what they were looking at. A drunk boyfriend, a domestic squabble, not a child, not a victim, not worth a 30-second query. The system did not fail Konarak Synthesophone because it lacked information. It failed him because the people operating it decided in real time, standing in a room with a drugged and bleeding child, that the information they already had was enough. So, 3 records, 3 failures, and a progression that strips away every excuse until nothing is left but the thing itself. In West Yorkshire, the record drowned. Millions of index cards, no way to cross-reference a system overwhelmed by its own size. Peter Sutcliffe was interviewed 9 times and walked out 9 times because the left hand could not see what the right hand had written. That is a failure of infrastructure. It was fixed. Holmes was built. The floors no longer need reinforcing. In Humberside, the record was erased. 8 complaints, none leading to conviction, all deleted by a policy designed to keep files tidy. Ian Huntley passed a background check because the check had nothing to find. That is a failure of policy. It was fixed. The disclosure and barring service was created. Intelligence is retained even without conviction. In Milwaukee, the record was there. Active, current. 1 query away. Jeffrey Dahmer was on probation for assaulting the older brother of the boy the officers were looking at, and no one typed his name into a computer. That is not a failure of infrastructure. It is not a failure of policy. It is a failure of will. And there is no system that fixes that. A clean record is not proof that someone is safe. It is proof that someone somewhere could not find the file or chose to destroy it, or chose not to look. The information existed in all 3 of these cases. It existed on paper in a database in an active probation file. And in all 3 cases, people died because the distance between a record and a decision is not a filing system. It is a human being. And human beings can drown in paper, follow a policy off a cliff, or stand in front of a bleeding child, and decide they already know enough. 13 women in West Yorkshire, 2 girls in Soham, a 14-year-old boy in Milwaukee, and the 4 who died after him. None of them were killed by a lack of information. They were killed by what happened or didn't happen between the moment the information existed and the moment someone was supposed to act on it. I'm Johnson. Thank you for sitting with the hard ones. I'll see you on Inex.